How good was life for ordinary Americans in the middle of the 20th century? Put it this way, in the 1950s and 1960s, many blue-collar workers in the United States could buy a house own, a car support, a spouse and children, and still have a backyard barbecue on the weekend, all on one income. For many young people today, that sounds less like history and more like science fiction. In 1959, U.S. Vice President Richard Nixon accompanied Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev through the American National Exhibition in Moscow. Inside the exhibition was a model American suburban home. The kitchen had a refrigerator, dishwasher stove, and other modern appliances. Nixon proudly explained that many American families could buy a similar house for around $10,000 to $15,000. Khrushchev smiled and mocked the display, asking whether Americans also had a machine that could put food into their mouths and push it down for them. It was a joke, but after the famous kitchen debate, many Soviet visitors were not laughing. They were shocked. They could not believe ordinary American families really lived with refrigerators, dishwashers, and spacious kitchens. To them, that kind of life sounded like something only millionaires could enjoy. Some even suspected the whole exhibition was a carefully staged American illusion. But at that moment, America really was living through its post-war golden age. It was the era many Americans still look back on with nostalgia, and it is one of the real historical references behind the phrase, "Make America Great Again." So how powerful was the American economy back then? The two world wars gave the United States enormous historical advantages. The wars expanded American steel, aviation, automobile, chemical, and machinery industries at incredible speed. After World War II, the United States, with a relatively small share of the world's population, produced a massive share of the world's industrial goods, steel, oil, and cars. America was not just a major economy. It was the engine of the global industrial system. The war also brought the United States an extraordinary concentration of scientific talent. Figures such as Albert Einstein, Theodor von Karman, and Wernher von Braun helped push American science and technology to a new level. Von Karman was the mentor of Qian Susan. Von Braun, the German rocket engineer, later played a key role in opening the American space age. Without this concentration of talent and technology, the Apollo program, the space race, and America's Cold War technological dominance might have developed very differently. By the end of World War II, the United States had become a supereconomy. Some estimates suggest it accounted for nearly half of global GDP. The American stock market rose strongly from 1949 to 1957, giving Wall Street one of its most remarkable bull markets. But the important part is this prosperity was not limited to Wall Street. It entered the lives of ordinary Americans. Post-war America was full of opportunities. Veterans could attend college and buy homes with government support. Workers without elite degrees could earn enough in factories to buy houses in the suburbs. In many families, one income could support the entire household. The American dream was not just a slogan. For many people, it felt real. Work hard, earn a steady paycheck, buy a home, raise a family, own a car, and fill your kitchen with modern appliances. That was the image of middle-class American life. Former Federal Reserve Chairman Alan Greenspan later described that era as a time when everything in America seemed new and shining. Not only were the products new, the future itself felt new. Income inequality was also relatively low compared with later decades. The rich were still rich, of course, but the gap between the top and the bottom was not as extreme as it would become later. If we look at the past century, there really was a period of several decades when a much larger share of Americans felt that the system worked for them. But then comes the real question. Where did that world go? Why can so many young Americans today no longer reproduce the lifestyle of their grandparents? The answer is not simply America declined. The deeper answer is that America's economic structure changed, its industries changed, and the way wealth was distributed changed. In the 1970s, the U.S. economy was hit by the oil crisis and stagflation. Stagflation means slow economic growth combined with high inflation. It is one of the most painful economic situations. When the economy grows and prices rise, people can tolerate it. But when wages stagnate and prices keep rising, life becomes harder every month. At the time, American industry depended heavily on oil. When oil prices rose, factory costs, transportation costs, and household expenses all rose with them. By 1974, inflation in the United States reached double digits. The stock market fell, the economy weakened, and national confidence was damaged. The Bretton Woods system, which had placed the US dollar at the center of the global monetary order, also collapsed during this period. At the same time, the Vietnam War damaged American confidence militarily and psychologically. The Golden Age was ending. America entered a more anxious and complicated era. It was also during this period that American industries accelerated their shift overseas. Why? Because producing goods inside the United States had become expensive. Wages were high, energy costs were high, unions were strong, and workers could strike for higher pay and shorter hours. Meanwhile, Japan, Germany, and later emerging Asian economies offered lower labor costs, lower production costs, and competitive manufacturing systems. From a corporate perspective, moving factories overseas made financial sense. By the 1980s, Reaganomics arrived. The Reagan administration did several major things. First, it weakened organized labor. Unions had once been powerful enough to stop factories and force companies to negotiate Reagan's hard stance changed the balance between labor and capital. Second, it deregulated parts of the economy. Industries such as aviation finance and telecommunications faced fewer restrictions, which encouraged competition and business expansion. Third, it cut taxes for businesses and reduced some public spending. These policies helped create a business revival often called the Reagan boom. But the cost was clear. Companies became freer. Capital became more powerful. Markets became more efficient, but workers lost protection and income inequality began to rise. In simple terms, America made it easier for businesses to make money, but businesses were no longer expected to take care of workers for life. When factories moved overseas, corporations gained cost advantages and shareholders gained profits. But what happened to the assembly line worker who lost his job? Often, nobody had a real answer. It was like sacrificing pawns to win the larger chess game, but nobody wants to be the pawn. And many ordinary Americans became exactly that. At the same time, another box was opened: financial deregulation. Interest rates became more market-driven, restrictions on banking loosened, and financial institutions gained more room to create new products. Finance itself is not evil. The problem is that when financial innovation runs faster than regulation, risk can build quietly. By the early 2000s, the American housing market was booming. Financial institutions lowered lending standards and issued large numbers of mortgages to borrowers with weak credit or high debt. These became subprime mortgages. Then those loans were packaged into complicated financial products and sold around the world. CDOs, CDSs, mortgage-backed securities, credit default swaps. The names sound confusing for a reason. You do not need to remember every term. Just understand, this risk was sliced, repackaged, resold, and layered over and over again. Everyone thought the risk had been moved somewhere else. But the risk had not disappeared. It had only been hidden. From 2000 to 2006, U.S. housing prices rose sharply. Everyone believed home prices would keep going up. Banks lent aggressively. Borrowers took on loans. Investors bought complex products. Then the bubble burst. The 2008 financial crisis hit. Businesses failed, layoffs spread, home prices collapsed, and many families could not pay their mortgages. Their homes were taken back by banks. Financial institutions had created the risk and Wall Street had captured the profits. But when the crisis exploded, ordinary families suffered some of the deepest losses. That is the cruel reality of wealth reshuffling. The people who lose the most are often not the people who designed the game. They are the people with the fewest chips. In 2011, Occupy Wall Street erupted. Protesters declared, "We are the 99." That slogan reflected decades of anger over unequal wealth distribution. Meanwhile, another transformation had been accelerating since the 1980s, the information technology revolution. Personal computers spread. The internet became commercial. IBM, Dell, Cisco, Intel, and other technology companies rose. By the 1990s, Silicon Valley had become the global center of innovation. Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, and other companies expanded rapidly. Information technology became a new engine of American growth. That sounds wonderful, but technological progress does not distribute wealth equally. Companies that own technology capital, platforms, and data can multiply productivity on an enormous scale. But what happens to traditional workers? When new tools emerge, old forms of labor are reshaped or eliminated. A tech giant can generate massive profit with a relatively small workforce, but a factory worker displaced by automation, outsourcing, and industrial decline cannot instantly become a software engineer. That is the harsh side of the technology age. The economy grows. The stock market rises. Company valuations explode. But many ordinary people feel left behind. Globalization, liberalization, financialization, and digitization sound sophisticated. But for working-class people, they can mean factories closing, wages, stagnating debt, increasing housing becoming unaffordable, and life becoming harder. The disappearance of America's middle-class golden age did not happen overnight. It was the result of industrial outsourcing, weakened unions, financial expansion, technological concentration, and global competition. America is still powerful. It still has world-leading technology companies, financial markets, military power, and the dollar system. But national power does not automatically mean ordinary people live easier lives. The United States consumes a huge share of global resources. From a global perspective, America itself sits near the top of the world's inequality structure. But inside America, inequality has also become severe. That is the irony. A rich country does not mean every citizen is rich. A high GDP does not mean every person can buy a home, afford healthcare, or pay off debt. The mid-20th century America, where one blue-collar income could support a family, was not a myth. It existed, but it existed under very special conditions. Post-war industrial dominance, strong manufacturing, powerful unions, rapid growth, and a more balanced distribution of wealth all supported that era. Once those conditions disappeared, that version of the American dream became very difficult to reproduce. So when Americans today feel nostalgic for the past, they are not only missing old houses, old cars, or old photographs. They are missing an era when ordinary work seemed to lead to a stable future. Today, the economy still grows. Technology still advances. Capital still makes money. But ordinary people increasingly struggle to believe that hard work alone can guarantee a dignified life. That is the real fracture. When we look back at the kitchen debate of 1959, it was not only an ideological confrontation between the United States and the Soviet Union. It was also a snapshot of America's golden age at its brightest moment. That kitchen contained more than a refrigerator and a dishwasher. It contained the confidence of an era, the belief that the future would be better, the ability of a nation to connect industry, technology, capital, and ordinary family life. Decades later, as manufacturing moved overseas, finance, expanded technology, wealth concentrated, and workers lost bargaining power, that kitchen slowly became a memory. America remains powerful. But many Americans can no longer return to that kitchen. That is the deepest lesson of America's golden age. It was not simply that Americans were lucky. It was that the industrial structure, global order, and wealth distribution of that time allowed ordinary people to ride the train of growth. Later, the train became faster. But many ordinary people were left standing on the platform.